Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Evolving HR webinar. We haven't done one of these for a while, so I'm quite excited. I'm going to, let me just have a look and see who is joining us. Okay, cool. I can see we've got a few people here already. So as always, if you've been to one of these before, if you've got any questions as we go through, just stick them in the chat. I will keep an eye on the chat so that the panel don't have to. And I will answer you as we go, or I'll kind of jump in where I think it's appropriate, and we'll try and make sure we answer all of your questions. So today we're going to be talking about ego. Just in the chat, for those of you that are listening, have any of you not worked with someone whose ego has got in the way of work? I think that'll be quicker than saying, has any, I don't know. The reason this topic came up as something that I wanted to cover was because I've personally seen a lot of issues caused by people's egos at work, particularly people in senior leadership positions. So that, I thought it would be an interesting conversation to have. So I'm joined today. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go around the screen the way that I have you. So Joe, do you want to go first? Tell everybody who you are.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So looking forward to having this interesting conversation. I'm Jo. I'm MD and founder of Let's Talk Talent. We're a talent consultancy that helps organizations get, keep and grow brilliant people. So I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to the chat.
Excellent. Claire.
Hey folks, I'm Claire Lowry-Hubball, founder of Impactful People, and I work with leaders, leadership teams primarily on how they show up as a collective.
And Niamh.
I'm Niamh Hannan. The funny spelling is pronounced Niamh. I'm a psychologist based here in Ireland, and I work with senior leaders and teams to help them to look beyond behaviour at how we can communicate and bond more successfully by focusing on emotions in the workplace.
Love it. So we've got a lovely mix of backgrounds and experience today. So just to ask all of you, and I'll kind of come to each of you in turn, but can you think of a time when you have realized that you're dealing with ego with someone at work and that it wasn't just a strong personality? Obviously, don't name anybody. Let's not get ourselves in trouble. But Claire, do you want to go first? Can you give me an example of when that's kind of shown up for you?
Yeah, I think, well, yes, I'll probably have a couple of examples. But one of the big things for me is no willingness to hear feedback. So I think there's strong personalities who can be quite directive and clear on what they want, but sometimes they might seem a bit defensive to feedback, but they'll go away and reflect on it and maybe come back to it. However, the other side is very much don't really want to hear it. They want a lot of yes people around them. And I've found no matter what they ask people to do, it's never right. So they are some of the big indicators for me in terms of when I realized actually this isn't just about someone who's very passionate about what they're doing, but they're prioritizing their own wants over necessarily what's right for the business and the people within it.
That's so true. That is so true. How about you, Niamh? Where have you seen it in the past, and how have you seen it show up?
Yeah, well, I've been lucky enough to be self-employed for most of my working career. So I haven't had any horrible bosses. And in the field of counselling before that, no. I guess where I come across it is if I'm working with an organisation and working with the company. I think what you said, Claire, just makes it really kind of clear and succinct, because it's the difference between somebody being maybe passionate or strong-minded about something versus, it's like, for me, the ego coming into the room it's about the person themselves. It's like, it's about me, rather than about the organisation or the people. And you do come across that when you're dealing with companies and they're giving you directions or directives about how they want things, or even just the micromanagement. It's like, you're bringing me in as an external expert on something, but you're going to tell me how to do my job. And it's, the ego can come in, and then there's even the extent of that, because obviously we all have ego. So I'm kind of interested to get into that as well.
Yeah, true. Really true.
How about you, Jo?
I think having worked and spent very early parts of my career in the media, I think at Channel 4 and the BBC, I think it would be remiss of me to say that no one had an ego. And I suppose, there's two examples I would give. One, from a presenter perspective, being literally a bit like Alex Ferguson, a presenter, which will remain nameless, shouting in my face. And it being about her perspective, and that I hadn't given her, and it was suddenly my fault, I think was quite a seminal part of my career, and made me and toughened me up. So, nobody really wants someone screaming in your face. So I think that's the worst version of that. But I think from a HR perspective, it was very much about someone taking ownership for the work that I'd done. And I have a big issue with that it becomes about, it should be about we. I'm not, excuse me, that's Dylan. Actually.
Oh, well, Dylan's gorgeous. Should we just talk about Dylan for the next half hour?
He's got an ego. But I think people taking credit. So you've spent a lot of time creating, and we get it as consultants, I would have thought, Claire, you get this, that you create a proposal, or you create something, or in-house, you create a really great strategy. And then someone takes it and puts their name on it and presents it and doesn't give you the opportunity. And I think that's when developmental, it becomes really annoying for me, because I think it should be about,
Dylan, it should be about
Dylan, come on, mate.
Really bad impression here. It should be giving someone the credit and having the empathy to realize that you're better by the sum of your parts than actually it all has to be to you. And I've learned that and run my business very much about that. It's not about me. It's about how we develop and how we do that. And I think that when someone has a big ego, they can't see that. And it has to be about them taking the glory. And then everybody loses, in my opinion. Nobody wins.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that, in the whole of this conversation, I have one particular CEO in mind that I worked with, and they will obviously remain nameless. I don't know why we do that. I would love to be able to name them, but, because he was an absolute arse, and I wouldn't want anybody else to have to work with him. But I believe he's retired now, which is probably a good thing. But it was things like, I don't know, in some respects, it was almost childish and nasty. It was like putting other people down, calling them out in front of the whole leadership team, almost taking pleasure in making people cry or getting people upset. And he had to be right about everything. And if something went really, really well, that was his success. And if something went really, really badly, it was everybody else's failure, which I think is quite common, that one, the kind of like, it's everybody's success, but just your failure. And also, shouting and almost tantrums, but this just inflated sense of self-importance as well, which was, it's like you said, interesting. You talking about the media, Joanne, like Joe, we all have ego. You have to have a little bit of ego to even, do what we're doing now. We're putting ourselves out here. Yeah. We're putting ourselves up as experts in something for a conversation. There's an element of ego to that, but it does tip over at a certain point, doesn't it? And then it becomes harmful to other people. And it's from an HR perspective, it's very, very difficult to try and work with someone like that, because you feel like you're tiptoeing all the time. It can be quite difficult.
I think you're right. Like, ego is healthy. We all need a level of ego, and Niamh will know the ins and outs of it far more than me, but we all need an element of it. And I always think about it a bit like anxiety. There's a point anxiety helps you as a human, and then it tips over into something very negative. And it's very similar with ego. If it's helping us stay balanced and, like you say, take the steps we need to, it's when it goes to the extreme, like with anything, it becomes really problematic. And I think your point around tiptoeing is a massive one, and that's where the whole culture of fear comes in, of people don't do things. And from my perspective, I look a lot about how you're organizations can operate based on the culture and the system that we're building as a leadership team. If your team's tiptoeing, nobody's making decisions, no one's taking action, they're waiting for direction because they're fearful of the impact of doing that. And I also think your point around how they talk to people, that was a big one for me. It's very, very patronizing, very personal. It's not objective, it's very personal. And that's really hard for the people around them to work with and adapt and, you know, be the best versions of themselves when you're fearful, one, of how people are going to speak to you. And then when they do, it's very personal and critical.
And I think it's quite different. I think it's very difficult to not take that personally, to your point, Claire. You know, even the most strong, and it's not about strength or resilience or all the things that we're told that we need to build in our sort of leaderships, but we're humans, you know, and I think there's something about, with ego, there's no kindness, there's no care, that, you know, and that for me is the best places I've worked with genuinely are kind. We went to a client yesterday, and one of their values, very easy for them to say, is kindness, but you can see it in every single, the way the environment's set up, the way that people talk in the lifts, the way that the founders are involved in all. It's there. It's not just and I think some of that kindness with the sort of, we were talking about it before, that cult of the personality in some ways has sort of, I don't know, it's gone away. It's not valued in the same way. And I don't know whether that's a gender thing, it's an age thing, but I can't take that on anymore. I won't take that on anymore. But I probably did in my 20s or my 30s. So it's interesting to see how work has changed, really.
Yeah, it's very true. And I do think, I don't know, I think I have no scientific basis for this, but I feel like as we get older, we resist it more. Like you just said, Joe, in your 20s, in my 20s and 30s, I would be very upset by people that behave that way. And in my 40s, I started thinking, hang on a minute. Nowadays, it just doesn't just like water off a duck's back. I'm like, if that's how you want to behave, knock yourself out, love. But it's a you problem. It's not going to have an impact on me.
Which is a more empowered position to be in. But when we're starting off in our 20s, we are more disempowered. We don't know the world of work. We're dependent on these people as our leaders and our bosses. And you know, we want to be open to learning and growing ourselves. So you end up, you've been around the bush enough at this stage, you know, that you've kind of seen it, been there, done that. It's like, right, I'm not taking it on about me anymore, because we can see the patterns.
I think that's so true. Sorry, Niamh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, for me, my sense of what does ego mean? For me, ego is like a big balloon, and people often, I think, confuse confidence and ego. And women in particular, and I don't know whether it's an Irish thing, but women in particular are often afraid of becoming more confident in case they become cocky. Now, to me, cocky is more associated with ego. If I think of ego as being like the balloon, empty inside, inflated, you use that word, Kirsty, that kind of sense of inflated self-importance, but like cannot take on any challenge, like you were saying, Claire, or any feedback, because that's like bursting the balloon, and then they're totally deflated, and then I am nothing, and I cannot exist if I am nothing. Therefore, I need to do something I need to put you down to make myself feel better, blow up my balloon again, feel all big and puffed up. And it's that constant kind of cycle of balloon blowing up by, I put other people down in order to make myself feel good. I take credit from others in order to make myself feel good. And then I am mean to others because that gives me a sense of power and kind of, again, keeps that balloon blown up. And if anybody challenges me or tries to deflate my balloon, I am totally burst. So it's not actually, I don't consider that to be real confidence at all.
It sounds like an awful lot of that comes from insecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see it. I can see it in children and teenagers at that point. It's really obvious, but it becomes such a set pattern by the time somebody gets to CEO or senior leader that you don't see the vulnerability anymore. You're only seeing that kind of power position. But it's hugely insecure. It's an awful way to live. You can never be happy in yourself or in the relationships around you.
I always used to wonder that when one of my oil traders or a senior leader used to throw one of their massive shit fits about something, I would always sit there and think, what are you like at home? Are you like this with your kids? Like, are you like this when you go to the supermarket, or do you talk to your wife like that? Or is this just something that you do at work? I don't know the answer to it. I just always found it really interesting. I've just noticed Yvette's put a comment in the chat saying it's interesting when you look at the psychology of ego, it's often very closely linked to narcissism, which in turn will take all feedback and challenge as a threat and therefore respond in that way. Yvette, we did have a chat about this beforehand. One of the things that we do not want to do is start diagnosing people because we're not qualified to do that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a book that I'm halfway through reading, but I got ChatGPT to do a summary of it because it's easier, called Snakes in Suits. And it's absolutely fascinating. And it talks about the prevalence of people with, actual personality disorders like psychopathy. I can't say it's psychopathy or sociopathy or narcissism, like in senior leadership or CEO roles. It's really interesting. But it also talks in that book about a couple of other they're not like diagnosed personality, they're not diagnosable conditions as such, but there's something called the dark triad, which it sounds so Star Wars. I found it absolutely fascinating, but it's like it puts narcissism, Machiavellianism and psychopathy as like subclinical traits, it calls it, and so they're found in the general population. And I don't know if there is a concentration of them in senior leadership roles, but it certainly happens. So that's where a lot of the ego-driven leadership stuff is from those kind of traits rather than. I noticed that we've got Carolyn Hobday here as well. So if you guys know Carolyn, if anybody listening knows Carolyn does a lot of work. She refers to this sort of leader as twats, and she wrote a book called I'm going to get this wrong now, All the Twats I Met Along the Way. I think it's Along the Way, All the Twats I Met Along the Way. But she does a lot of work with leaders now where she talks about de-twatifying. And so she's actually speaking at the Evolving HR conference in November as well. So it's good to have you here, Carolyn. She's talking about the dark triad of leadership as well, which is what I was just talking about. And then there's something else that they call hubris syndrome, which is a pattern that is acquired through holding power. And that is something that I always used to find really interesting. So I'm totally dominating the conversation here. I'll come back to you in a minute. Traders that would come in straight from college into my organization, like absolutely green, come into a very junior role. And at some point in their career trajectory, when they started to do really well, they'd start developing all of these traits and start treating other people like absolute cack. And I remember thinking, I knew you when you were 21 and you weren't like this then. So it's almost like it's acquired as they get the power and as they get the positive feedback and they get told that they're amazing and they're doing so well. And then I think they just start to believe it a little bit too much. And that, yeah.
Is it that they believe it, or is it like Niamh said, they're scared of losing it?
Yeah.
I was going to say that I do think there's I think your point around insecurity and all the stuff Niamh was saying a moment ago rings so true for me. So one of the big things is the reason they react really badly to feedback is, someone mentioned this earlier, it's seen as a threat because they feel like it's a personal attack on them. So even if you challenge the idea, they see that as them being accused of being a failure rather than their idea maybe being something that could be worked on. So I do think all of it boils down to a fear. And this is something I talk to leaders about all the time, is you have to know what your CEOs, founders, other senior leaders, like fear is. What is it that keeps them up at night? Because for those that are less reflective and more, I'm going to say emotionally driven, because I think that's the case for a lot of egotistical leaders, you have to know what their fears are to get any chance of having buy-in from them, because you need to be able to communicate with them in a way that alleviates that fear. So this thing is going to help prevent that fear, or going to help you realize that success you want to achieve. But yeah, I think so much of it is about insecurity. And the other side of it, someone mentioned this earlier, you've got to question in the chat, you've got to question what system allows these, which is something I could bang on about all day. And the world around us, we were talking before, is highlighting this beautifully for us in a terrifying way at the moment. But I think there's still such a big thing about what success actually is. And when you're younger in your career, you're more easily influenced because you don't know that there's different options, which is something I was thinking about as you were talking earlier. Well, you don't know any different when you're younger. You don't know workplaces can be different. You don't know leaders can be different. So you tolerate things that as you get older, you just wouldn't tolerate. And I had the experience early. I used to work in criminal law, which had questionable culture. And there were some terrible things that went on there that I won't necessarily go into detail now, but I still remember to this day, I've been there like 4 or 5 years at this point, and we had a new girl join. She was younger than me, and she was the first person who said openly, "What the fuck? Like, people shouldn't be allowed to talk to each other like that. What?" And it was the first person I'd heard that wasn't just like talking about it because they got in trouble or something, who actually stood up and said, "This is not acceptable." And I was like, oh, wait, hang on. Although I thought it was horrible, I hadn't thought that actually I should be challenging that. I didn't have the confidence necessarily. But this just one person coming in and saying, that is not cool, this is not how people should be operating, made me really reflect on, did I want to be part of that anymore? And what could I do?
Well, I think sometimes it's a projection. Remy makes a really good point about that people don't operate in isolation. They, to Claire, to your point about the organizational system, and I've been asked to do things. I remember I was at a telco and I was heading up talent acquisition, and I got told by my boss that I had to have a conversation with one of my TA people because she had tattoos. And because someone in the business had complained about the fact that they didn't think it was aesthetically right that she had. So I turned around and said very glimpsely to them, well, does she do a good job? Does she get you the candidates that you want? And I was then told off by my boss for being too bold about it. And I remember, there are many times I'm quite an emotional person, cried in the toilet because of these, because of these things, when really I was standing up for somebody within a system and it felt completely unfair to me. So if the organizational system, people, there's a business that we work with that they had a value called "No Dickheads Allowed," and Yvette said she's going to write a book. We had a cat. She spent the day with me on Tuesday. She's a member of my team, and okay, but someone doesn't. I don't know. Maybe I see the good in people, but you don't just become a dickhead overnight. You learn from people.
No, I think it takes a lot of practice.
Right, it takes a lot of practice. But your role model, and to your point about the traders, if they see that being rewarded and recognised, let's face it, it is rewarded in that. I've worked in FS. Then you're going to adopt the behaviours and the mindset of the people that are successful. Because if you go against that cultural norm, you won't be there. Let's face it. In that one, and that is for me, that's scary as shit.
And that's the point that Anna's made in the chat, saying when they see other people having success and it looks that way, they begin to emulate shitty behaviours that go unchallenged. And we've all seen that happen.
Yeah. And that scares me more than the single entity. It's becoming not just a CEO problem, it's becoming actually
the culture of the organisation.
Yes,
it does. This is, God, I could bang on about this bit all day, because that's exactly what
go for it
is your senior leaders. So if you do have that one individual, what happens is they get surrounded by yes people, because they either get bored of saying no.
I can think of a really good example in America.
I don't know if I've heard that one, Kirsty.
I don't think I'll name them.
I have shut off all news at the moment, so but yeah, they get surrounded by the yes people. Then their teams see that behavior not challenging, just having to do what you're told, because, you know, and that is what creates these systems and these cultures. Sorry, Niamh, I think you were going to come in with something really insightful too.
I was thinking back to that, the hubris point that you introduced, because there's quite an old, interesting social psychology experiment that was done years ago, and it had to be shut down because what they did in a kind of a prison setting was they just put people without experience into the prison guard role, and it's like immediately they took on the power of that role and became abusive, and we're beating up the prisoners who weren't actual prisoners either, because it was all like an experiment, and they had to stop the whole experiment. But it was that, again, that kind of, they hadn't earned that power over years by becoming CEO or anything. They were just put into a more powerful position in a uniform, probably with a truncheon on their belt, and that they took on that kind of hubris, you know, that where they were abusing that position of power. So it's interesting that you can put what might normally be a good person into a situation, and if there's kind of expectations or there's norms around that it's like power goes to our heads. You know?
I think maybe I'm putting myself in this fiery line here, but I think we've probably all done that on a smaller scale at some point. Like, I know I've acted up in certain situations where, and I also know it's purely insecurity that drove it. I felt out of place, or, you know, I was worried, and then maybe I overacted what I thought was expected of me. So we all have elements of it. It's just most of us can be self-aware and be like, okay, that didn't feel nice, and apologize or do something better next time. But they don't have the ability to do that self-reflection and learn and do something different next time.
I think you're right. It's like, no one's perfect, and I always use that phrase, you know, sort of progress, not perfection, and we're all a work in progress, right? I definitely can identify with both what you're saying. I've done things that I'm not, you know, or said things in the heat of the moment. My brain hasn't engaged with my mouth, but I've apologized, and and if you have a good relationship, you can't get it right all the time. I don't think it's about that. I think it's, to your points, it's about learning. And working in senior level and working with senior leaders, I just feel that the pressure sometimes just brings out the worst. And we all know a strength is great, but it can be overused but we're now to a point sometimes where, I don't know, people are just they're getting away with it too much. So when's it, you know, when are we going to say enough is enough? And things are going to, I don't know, Niamh, what were you?
No, I'm just thinking, even just what you were saying, you know, it's all learning. I've made mistakes and I can learn and grow from them. But even that statement indicates your ability to put your ego aside. And that's what's lacking in the bosses that we're talking about, or the senior leaders that we're talking about. They don't have that capacity to put their ego aside, to see something as learning. Because actually, you know, and if we think back to those situations where we did kind of step into that ego place ourselves, maybe, or hubris, that we lacked confidence in that situation. Claire, you were saying that as well, probably because I wasn't confident enough. And so, you know, you kind of overdo something, or you think about how you should be according to other people's expectations of you. And then, you know, if you're in a leadership role, you've got all these expectations, both of yourself and of what you think others expect of you, and expectations that you've now set in place that you now have to continue to keep up as well. So there's that kind of internalized and external pressure, and the numbers to keep up to, and all of that. So it becomes that kind of a pressure cooker. That means that continued that behavior continues, you know, and grows, particularly as it's being rewarded. If, you know, like I'm thinking of the narcissistic behavior as well, that like sociopathic behavior tends to be antisocial. So they're less likely to be, you know, charming and promoted. But psychopaths are often CEOs, and narcissists are very charming and can pull the wool over people's eyes quite easily. And it's the ego that's happening for both there, and not necessarily that like you'd have that clinical definition, but that kind of behaviour or trace is there for people.
So I just want to, I've got about 20 different things going around in my head. I'm just going to throw a few thoughts out there and then just let you guys have at it. When you could see that this is having a destructive or negative effect in an organization, whether that is down to one individual at the top or whether it has become systemic within that organization, what on earth can someone in an HR role or anyone in that organization do about it beyond resigning and going to work somewhere else? Like, are those sorts of people capable of change? I guess is part of that question. And then, you know, if you can't change an individual, how do you learn to work with them? And if you, and also changing the whole organization, and just, I'm throwing all of that out there. And yeah.
This is something I think about a lot in, because I think I've been there myself, but also I speak to a lot of people who feel that way. And I think there's a few different layers to it. It's obviously not black and white. I think the first thing is knowing what you're willing to tolerate. I know you said not just packing in and walking away, but that is an absolutely valid response. You have
I did it.
Well-being. Yeah, me too. You have to protect your well-being. For me, I needed to feel like I tried everything I could. And the final point was me and the CEO had a very honest conversation, and they made it clear to me they were aware and they had no interest in changing. So that for me was my, okay, there's no point me being here. That was my line. I was ahead of people, like the most senior people person at the time. And I was like, okay, time to go. The other things are, I think we talk a lot about, circle of control, influence, concern, knowing what you can directly control and knowing what you can try and influence is really important. Like, you can be concerned about it, but if you spend too much time in that concern, trying to solve every problem for everyone, you're going to drive yourself to insanity. So knowing what you can try and influence, and that's where I go back to knowing what the fears are. I call it hitting them in the feels. Anytime you want buy-in from someone, you've got to hit them in the feels, and that means you've got to know what they care about. So raising it is the first thing, being able to have a discussion about it. Obviously, that person's response, or maybe other members of the leadership team, will either show interest that that's an area of concern, or they'll not. But being able to articulate it in a way that is meaningful to the business or that individual. So this is the risk to the business strategy, or this will enable us to do X, Y, and Z. And then the last bit is what you can do for yourself and your team. So there'll always be things within your control that you can do. But I do think you have to start with, like, what am I willing to tolerate? Because if you go into trying to solve everything for everyone, I don't think you can change people. None of us can change anyone else. They can only change themselves. So we can influence them to change, but we can't make them take the action. So that for me is the difference of how far are you willing to go to try and influence? What's your boundary around that? And then focusing on the bits that you can control. And I also know it's a massive place of privilege to say, just leave, because not everyone is in a position to do that.
Yeah.
So I think if you can't leave, it's about focusing in on the things that you can actually control, create the best environment for yourself and the people working directly with you.
And then there's quite a skill involved in when you identify that there are things that you can't control, you then need to focus on how you don't let them get to you anymore, if that makes sense. And I think that is something that I got really, really good at. And I always say to people, it's not about not caring. It's about caring a little less, like not letting it through. And again, it's not about resilience. I don't know what it was. It was almost like I had a conversation with myself that if someone is going to shout at me and scream in my face, that is how they are choosing to respond to this situation.
Yeah.
It isn't actually about me. I don't know. I just got to a point where that seemed to actually get through to me, to the point that I actually laughed when someone did it one of the last times. And they just looked at me and I went, I'm sorry, you're being ridiculous. And I would have dared to say that to somebody 20 years previously, but I was like, if you could see yourself right now, you're being ridiculous. And I'm not suggesting that everybody should go and say that to their CAO, because you'll probably get fired. But I think I just got an awful lot less tolerant of that kind of thing. So it was like, I'm not going to change you. Certainly not going to change your whole personality, but I can focus on little things that you do. So if you scream at someone in a public setting, I'm going to have a conversation with you about how that isn't appropriate to do that.
Yeah.
You do it. I did it without emotion. It was like, do you have any idea how out of control and ridiculous you look when you're shouting at someone in front of everybody else? That seemed to work for some of them, because they don't want to look like a fool. So me saying, you looked like a fool when you did this just now, I remember the guy looking at me and going, so should I call them into a meeting room before I scream at them? And I went, well, that would be like 5% in the right direction. It would be better if you didn't scream at them at all. Which was, I thought was so interesting, because he was more concerned about how he had come across. And how, because I'd saying, you look like you're completely out of control, like you've lost control.
But that's his but that comes down to ego, right? You know, you don't want to lose face, but it's not addressing the behavior that we kind of talked about. I mean, I think to a certain extent it's about reputational damage. You know, as HR, we have to pivot all the time between, you know, support, challenge, coaching, all of those types of things. But it kind of depends where if it's an individual and you have that relationship, then you can try and influence. But if they're not going to listen, then I say it all the time to people, HLTs that I'm coaching, you know, it may not be the right culture for you. So, you know, and again, I pick up on what Claire's saying. It comes from a place of privilege. I've walked when I've not been backed. So, you know, I can say I truly know how that feels. However, I also think that if it's about evidence sometimes, I'm not talking about from a disciplinary or, you know, kind of a grievance perspective, but sometimes those things make a difference. If people do stand, then something unfortunately has to gets done. And I've run a number of cultural audits for people where people are too frightened to say anything. But when you've got that at someone, then as a role as a consultant, we have a privileged position to play that back. We can't make them change. No. And, you know, I've got too long in the tooth now to take on that. And if someone's not willing to listen, then they're not the right. Then I'll walk away. I always say you can bring a horse, you know, like everyone says, a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Yeah. Right. But if I feel that I have done what's right for the people that work for that leader, and I have told my truth and I've tried a number of strategies, then I can sleep at night. Years ago, I couldn't. It's like, I've got to solve it. I'm failing if I don't solve it. Now I'm like, okay, I will do my best, but if that person won't listen, then you kind of just have to back off.
Yeah.
Because it's detrimental. We've talked about it. It ends up being detrimental to you. And I think that's much more worrying about how it affects someone's mental health, how it affects their family, how it affects, you know, lots of different scenarios.
And that's the one thing we can control, is how we, as much as it might feel impossible in the moment, how we respond to it and whether we carry it with us for days on end afterwards. Kylie's just put in the chat about the salesperson that brings in the most money. So the example that I just gave you of the guy screaming at someone, he was the trading leader of it was a commodities trading company, and his particular team had made $200 million the previous year, and there were only 8 of them.
Wow.
An absolute fortune. I knew he wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, I mean, I left that company. They did let him go eventually. They retired him 2 years ago, but he had been there since college. And he was also the example that I was giving, that he didn't used to be like that when he first started, and it just sort of came over time. But no one was going to get rid of him because he ran the most successful trading team. So the approach that I took in the end to that was, you know, someone would come and complain about it to me, and I would have to be very, very honest with them and just say, there isn't going to be anything we can do to change the way he is. I can work with you on how you cope with it and how you respond to him, but the whole time that you're going to be working with him, that's what he's going to be like. And I have no power to change that, and nobody else has any appetite to change that. Do I think it's right? No, not at all. But we are where we are. And then they would either learn to ignore him or just dance to his tune and stay on the right side of him, or they'd find something else and move on. And they just dance to his tune because they were also getting massive bonuses as well, being part of that team.
Yeah. And it seems to me that there's like a lot of missed opportunities there before he becomes a senior leader. Yeah. You know, that like in this example, he started from as a graduate. That like, again, if we go back to that kind of an inflated balloon thing, and there's fear, and if we look at this from an attachment lens, then there's difficulty for these people in forming secure attachments. They're highly insecure and feeling unsafe in their relationships, so they try and control or bludgeon you into, you know, which means that like their relationships are a disaster all around. Then, you know, everybody's talking about them or leaving or else just sycophantic and can't challenge, which isn't real either. So you know, it's an interesting one how that's bred. It's not dealt with. It's not even about dealing with things on a behavior level, because behavior is still on the surface. I think it's that emotional layer. It's you know, how do you help to create a safe environment where somebody like that is in power, and how when they're feeling unsafe themselves, essentially, which is why they keep recreating that around them.
That's what I always used to think. He's either struggling with the pressure, he doesn't know how to deal with stress, or he's worried every moment that it's all, I mean, they are incredibly high pressure jobs, I get that, but not everybody who works in that field behaves the way he did. His team were all absolutely lovely. None of them were like it. Just him.
I recently watched The Real Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if you've seen it, but this is like screaming to me right now, everything we're talking about, because they were all young when they got involved. It was all about playing on people's vulnerabilities to get them to come and work there and work, you know, earn this money, do these awful challenges and hazing and stuff, but that'll get you to here and get you the life that Justin's got and all the money and all the stuff that goes with it. But when things fell apart, they all just absolutely turned on each other, because they didn't have, like you're saying, the depth of any relationship. They're all there to get a leg up off each other, to make as much money as they can. And it is very much like you said, it's not about building relationships and community, which I think is actually what more of the other side of the coin is about, is how do we elevate each other? How do we grow and scale through and with others? Because that for me is what leadership is. It's growing and scaling through and with others. When I think about these scenarios, like, great, that guy was earning loads of money, but there's going to be a point, he as an individual can no longer scale the business where it needs to go. And he's already peed off so many people that you haven't got the people that are then going to help you scale. So even if it works for a while, they all have a capacity of which they're going to hit a limit. And you're just not going to be able to do some of the things that you could potentially have done if you were focusing more on a positive collective environment.
I'd like to think that's true, but again, I think we can probably all think of hugely powerful white men who you know, scale and grow and are ruthless in, you know, in how they treat people throughout the organization, and it can be a global organization, and then just start another company and they can continue. I do think that there's an emptiness there, going back to the balloon, you know, and I've worked a lot with leaders who get to, you know, maybe middle age, or they get to a certain point where it's like, I've been working, because maybe when we're young, we're still under the illusion that the money and the power is going to bring us happiness and contentment and all those good things. And for many people, it's not until you get to that point that you kind of realize, okay, I've worked my whole life to get to the top. I'm at the top. I don't like the view. It doesn't feel good up here. And it takes a lot of courage and strength to be able to kind of even admit that to yourself rather than just keep going. So, you know, the humanness, where there isn't maybe, you know, a complete pathological personality, the humanness there, I think, will struggle, because all the money in the world, I mean, there's plenty of people who are very powerful and very rich and very unhappy. It doesn't buy it, that kind of happiness. But that's the looking inside. That's the work. That unfortunately, the type that we're talking about might never come to that conclusion, because it's gone on for so long, I think. But
it's hard to change. It's hard, to your point, is you're talking about a mindset shift, right? And mindset is incredibly difficult to change. So you're starting from a difficult point anyway. And, you know, that's the Spider-Man quote, isn't there? You know, what comes with power comes with great responsibility. And, you know, I think sometimes people forget what got them here won't get them there. And, you know, change, if someone wants to change, we keep coming back to this. So if someone wants to change, they will change. But if they don't, then it's very difficult as an HR professional to work with that continually. And that's why we're seeing some really good people in the market struggling and making very different choices about whether they go into PE-backed or founder-led or, you know, big organizations, because they are fed up with dealing with the politics.
Yeah, agreed.
And you know, we've got some fantastic talent that is, to be honest with you, afraid to go back in because of what that's gone on before. And that, I just think, is sad. I just think it's incredibly sad, because you've got so much experience and so much knowledge to give, but you're being held back by some of the ecosystem and some of that is sort of prevailing at the moment. And I am a positive person, but it does worry me. It really, really does worry me that talent is choosing to leave an industry where actually at the heart of it is about growth and, you know, supporting people and, you know, unlocking potential, driving performance, all of these things that we love to do. But you're fighting a system that, in effect, is sort of having a bit of a fight with you in lots of ways. It's like being a gladiator in some ways. And I just think that that mindset is just sometimes very impossible to shift.
I think that's two different value systems. Sorry, Claire.
I was just saying, I think it's so true. It's that goes back to understanding the system you're operating in and what you can and can't do within it, and whether or not you can tolerate that. Because I think I have in the past spent too long trying to fight it instead of saying, okay, what could I do within this? And then when I did get to that point, I realized it was stuff that I didn't feel like was really impactful and maybe didn't want to spend my time doing. But the other big thing that always, Kirsty's heard me bang on about this probably a million times, this is not HR's problem. This is everybody's problem. And I have been in so many times where I, as HR, have had to call something out, even though I've got other leaders bitching in my ear about it, but they won't say anything. And I'll say something on our behalf and be like, so-and-so, what do you think? And it'll be like, silence. And it's like, well, hang on a minute ago, 5 minutes before this call, you were messaging me going, I can't believe about this, blah, blah, blah. This is every leader's responsibility to speak up and come together. And like if you really, I'm going to say rebellion, but if we want change, we've all done change. We all know change requires ripples that turn into the big tidal waves. You as an individual are not responsible for fixing everything for everyone. Absolutely. If you can find your allies of people who also are feeling frustrated and want to see change, the more you can come together and try and drive that, the more impactful it's going to be. But also, if you are calling out and everyone else is sitting in silence, that tells you a lot about the other leaders in the business as well.
100%.
It's a fear-based system. It can be like I think there's two things coming out for me. One is it comes back again to the importance of relationships and being able to connect with the people that you work with, whether that's somebody that you report into or people that you collaborate with. Those emotional connections are of utmost importance to your job satisfaction. They're absolutely critical. And when you can't connect, inevitably you end up leaving. So, you know, even if you've got a great manager at this level, if you've got somebody who, you know, everybody else is feeling disconnected with, who's making the decisions or deciding where the money goes, then in the end of it all, that kind of makes it difficult for everybody. So there's the importance of the relationships and the importance of the system. But again, that's a two-way thing, because the system, the organization, that what you've put in place, like, you can create good leaders in a system. You can create a system where coaching is a norm, for example, not just for the problem people who are sent, that it's a growth mindset rather than a fix this problem mindset, you know. So you can create that system where, you know, kindness is a value, compassion, that's instilled, that's how it's led. Or you can create, you know, a problem system, but we're also contributing to the system. It's not something that happens to us. We're contributors. We're all part of that. So like, I mean, for somebody who, if you were a little peg down here and you've got a big CEO up there in a large company that you don't even get to ever meet, but they're impacting, then that's a difficult situation. But each of us have maybe within our own little ecosystem more power to make change, to create change, to lead change, and to build those kind of relationships so that you can have, like, even within a large organization, you have some teams where they have a wonderful culture and other teams where it's a disaster. And a huge amount of that is up to how you lead in that. So yeah, it comes back to the relationships for me, I think. But
then it doesn't so much of all of the things that we deal with, the things when things go wrong at work, it's nearly always to do with communication and relationships in some way. It might be one individual or the entire system, but everything comes back to communication and relationships. I'm conscious of time. So for an audience of HR professionals, for anyone finding themselves stuck in a situation where they're working either within a culture that is ego-driven and kind of fear-based, or with an individual, what would you suggest for them? I mean, how would you suggest that they kind of take things forward?
Kind of touched on this a bit, but I think this is probably super simple. But I think the first thing is find someone to talk to, because my experience of this is it can make you feel like you're going insane, first of all. Because there can be a lot of gaslighting going on in this situation as well. So I think I would find someone to talk to, whether that's someone also in the company, a mentor, a friend, somebody that you can talk some of it through with, because it can feel very, very intense and heavy. And then I think it is about understanding, is this a wider problem, which normally you've got a pretty good idea about, and starting small. So focus on the things that you can control. But I do think being able to get stuff out, like a lot of what I do at the moment, one of the first sessions I run with leadership teams is the get it all out on the table session. And so many times we'll leave them and people say to me, oh, I didn't know that person felt that way, or they've never said that, because we don't make time for those conversations. So I do think if you can try and get that, even if it's not directly with that person initially, but understand how broad the impact is. And normally in HR, we've got a better view of that, either from engagement surveys or things we hear, people generally come and talk to us, or we hear things on the grapevine. So yeah, I think it is about starting small, but I do think the priority is making sure you've got support as well. I've been in it in standalone roles, and even if you're not a standalone, often you've got team of people. You can't be moaning to your team or talking to your team about it in the same way that you probably need to. So I do think there's an element of protect yourself, so you can be the whole fill your cup before you worry about or put your oxygen mask on for everyone else's, because by the time you're getting to this, you're probably already really frustrated and have probably been quite impacted by those behaviors anyway. So I do think there is a bit about protect yourself first and then think about how you actually go forth.
I think you're totally right. The build that I would have on that is, I think we need to trust our guts more. So I think we And I've been in these situations. I know what's going on. I can feel it in every fibre. But I've been, for whatever reason, scared or anxious or uncertain. But my gut, 99.9% of the time, has been right. And when I haven't trusted my gut, that's when I've made errors, and I feel. So I think it's trusting your gut, and you can check it through a mentor, through having having allies and sponsors and all of those things and everything. But you know really what's going on, and you know the way that it's affecting you. And if you don't listen to that, then you're dismissing a massive part of yourself, and therefore you're leaning into some of the dark side around, that really will make you make probably the wrong decisions for you at the end of the day. So trust your gut, because it will be right. You know better than anybody, really.
It's very true. Niamh, what would you add?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to add there. There's a lot going on in my mind about, because something that I'm generally very careful about is having somebody labeled as the difficult person, because I mean, Kirsty, like we talked about this, that you was like, I was that difficult person, so I don't like using that label as leaving somebody as the difficult person, because then it becomes a kind of an us and them. It can set up the whole thing. And it can become let's all join forces to challenge them, which only makes them reinforce the balloon with steel, because they can sense that they're under battle. So actually, I mean, much earlier on in the process, ideally, it's to try and build a relationship to create some safety. None of us like getting negative feedback. What makes it okay for us to take that on is some safety, some kind of sense of this person is doing it from a good intention. So it's kind of even using that knowledge when we're working with somebody that might be pinpointed as the difficult person. What makes it more challenging is the level of power that they've been given.
Yeah.
This is at another level in the organization. This is so much easier to deal with. It's really about, connecting in with them, helping them to feel safe enough that they can open up and be vulnerable and look at and self-reflect, because that takes a lot of strength to be able to be vulnerable and look at what might I be doing wrong and where can I improve. But when you've got somebody with power, you do have to. Everybody has to look out for themselves, but also their team, and.
The whole concept of power in a work context, utterly ridiculous, because the second that person steps out into the street, they're just the same as everybody else. Yeah. It's like this. But one thing if you're like a politician and you're in charge of a whole country, but when it's organizational, even if it's a large organization, the second you're outside of that building, it means nothing. But we put so much into that, and these people are almost revered in some organizations. There's an expression that makes me shudder.
And they're given a political power sometimes as well.
That's true. That is true. But I've heard people use the expression higher ups, and that makes me want to vomit. Because it's like they're not higher up, they just get paid a bit more than you, and their job's got a bit more accountability and responsibility. That's all. They're no different as my dad always used to say, we all put our trousers on the same way. And so we give this we give status to people because of a job that they do, and then it's a bizarre. The whole world of work it's quite odd sometimes, isn't it? When we think about where we've got to with it, and the original purpose behind it was, we need to get this done. There aren't enough of us. Let's get some more people to get this done. That was really all it was to start with. Like, if we're going to do this and sell it and make some money, we might need a few more people. And then we've ended up with like management hierarchies and structures and all of this stuff. And obviously there's going to be good and bad that comes from that. But it's fascinating, really, isn't it? Organizational psychology. It really is.
Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to just apologise to everybody that I'm sitting in pitch darkness today. It is because it is 42 degrees outside here today, so we have every single curtain shut, and I have moved down to the living room where is our sole air conditioning unit, and we just happen to have one black wall in here, so it looks like I'm sitting in a cave. The rest of the room is not black. Just this.
No, your pink is shining through.
I thought if I wear black and I'm sitting with this background, I'm just going to be like a little moon face.
Great.
I have quite enjoyed that. Kirsty's head and hands floating.
Yeah.
Hands and my pentagram in the background. But, oh my goodness. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I always do love these conversations, and I always feel like we could probably talk for another hour. But thank you to everybody who's joined, and the questions at one point were coming through so fast I couldn't keep up with them, so massively appreciate that. It's always so great when you guys get involved as well. I hope this has been useful. I will send the recording out to everybody who registered, so whether you were here now or not, you'll get the recording tomorrow. But yeah, thanks very much. We'll be back in probably in September, I think, with our next webinar. We tend to give August a miss because no one is around. So, yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.